It was a cool June morning in Vancouver, Washington in 2019. The kind of morning that promises a bright, ordinary day. But for 17-year-old Nikki Kuhnhausen, the day would be anything but ordinary. It would be her last. Nikki was a teenager with a vibrant spirit, a love for makeup and Nicki Minaj, and a future she was only just beginning to imagine. She was also transgender, a fact that, in a cruel and tragic twist, would become the very reason her life was brutally cut short. Her story is one of a chance encounter, a web of lies and a grim discovery on a remote mountainside. It's a case that would not only see a killer brought to justice, but would also change the law itself. So, let's dive in. The story begins on the evening of June 5th, 2019. Nikki had been out with friends in downtown Vancouver before heading back to the home of her roommate, Faith Fieldos. Life for a teenager seemed to be moving along, but in the early hours of the next morning, around 6 a.m. on June 6th, Nikki left the house. She was wearing a coat that belonged to a man she'd met the night before, and she was carrying a bottle of vodka. This man was 25-year-old David Bogdanov, a Russian-American from the area. This was the last time anyone who cared for Nikki would ever see her alive. Her mother, Lisa Woods, a constant in her life, grew worried when Nikki, who was usually in contact, stopped answering her calls and messages. By June 10th, the silence was deafening, and Lisa did what any terrified parent would do. She reported her daughter missing. The initial investigation was, as these things often are, a slow burn. The media coverage was sparse and details were few, but behind the scenes, the Vancouver Police Department was piecing together a timeline. A critical lead came from Nikki's mother on June 13th, when she told an officer that Nikki had left with a Russian man the morning she vanished. That man, of course, was David Bogdanov. Detectives, including Detective David Jensen, got to work. They soon uncovered the digital breadcrumbs that would lead them right to Bogdanov's door. Nikki and Bogdanov had first met briefly on the evening of the 5th. Later, they reconnected on Snapchat, the social media app where messages disappear, arranging to meet up again. At approximately 5:30 a.m. on June 6th, a final Snapchat message was exchanged between them, confirming their plans. It was the last digital trace of Nikki Kuhnhausen. The picture painted by police investigation and, later, Bogdanov's own admissions, is a chilling one of a predatory encounter. Bogdanov gave Nikki alcohol and offered her a ride in his white van. He dropped her off for a short time, but she returned around 5 a.m., agreeing to meet him once more. This second meeting took place in the van, where a sexual encounter occurred. But what happened next is where the story takes a dark and sinister turn. After this encounter, Bogdanov didn't drive home. Instead, his phone's cell tower data would later reveal a journey to the remote, densely wooded area of Larch Mountain. His phone was pinging off towers there between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. on June 6th, an hour and 25 minutes after he was with Nikki. This timeline created a massive, glaring hole in the story Bogdanov first told police. Initially, he claimed that during their time together, Nikki had disclosed that she was transgender. He said he was shocked. Asked her to get out of his vehicle, she walked away, and he never saw her again. A simple, if callous, story. But the cell tower data told a very different tale. It placed him on a remote mountain long after he claimed to have dropped her off. This discrepancy was the pivot point, the moment the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to a homicide. David Bogdanov wasn't just a man who'd had a date, he was now the prime suspect in a murder. For 6 long months, there was no sign of Nikki. Her family and community held on to hope, but as the seasons changed, that hope grew fainter. Then, on the morning of December 7th, 2019, a hiker in the Larch Mountain area made a grim discovery. In a remote, heavily wooded area, down a steep embankment off a logging road, were human remains. This transformed the case entirely. It was now a race to identify the victim and build a case against the killer. Forensic analysis soon confirmed the worst. The remains were those of Nikki Kuhnhausen. The medical examiner, Dr. Burt, determined the cause of death was asphyxiation. She had been strangled. It was officially a homicide. The scene yielded crucial evidence: a skull, other skeletal remains, jewelry, clothing, and most damningly, a ligature, a cord tied with a distinct 3.97-inch knot. Woven into that knot were artificial hair extensions that matched those Nikki had been wearing. The murder weapon, it seemed, was a common cell phone charging cord. All focus now zeroed in on David Bogdanov. The cell tower data that had first contradicted his alibi was now a powerful piece of circumstantial evidence, placing him at the very scene where Nikki's body was dumped. But there was more. As investigators dug deeper, they found that Bogdanov's actions after June 6th were those of a man who knew exactly what he had done. He didn't go home. He dumped her body, and then, on the very day of the murder, he booked a one-way flight to Ukraine. He spent 6 weeks abroad before returning to Washington, likely believing he had gotten away with it. He was wrong. On December 17, 2019, Bogdanov was arrested and charged with second-degree murder.
Friends gathered tonight at a vigil for a Vancouver teen who police say was murdered. Nikki Kuhnhausen's body was found early this month in a remote part of Clark County. Our Jenny Young is live tonight with what Nikki's family wants you to know about. Jenny.
Well, Dan, her family tells us that she was creative, loving, and really meant a lot to a lot of people. That was so evident at the vigil that was held at this church earlier tonight. It was standing room only inside the Vancouver United Church of Christ tonight, where hundreds of people showed up to remember Nikki Kuhnhausen.
Last 6 months has been the longest 6 months of our lives.
Vancouver police say 17-year-old Nikki was murdered back in June. Her body was found 2 weeks ago in the Larch Mountain area. Investigators arrested 25-year-old David Bogdanov and charged him with Nikki's murder.
It's just been a roller coaster ride up and down, playing in our minds what has happened, where is she?
She was a rainbow of light. She was so confident in who she was.
Today, the victim's family spoke with the media. Her mother, Lisa, recalled the day Nikki went missing.
And when she didn't answer my messages on June 6th, I knew something was wrong.
Lisa said she never gave up hope her daughter would be found alive.
I had made her a Christmas card that morning because I had hoped that she was coming home.
Detectives haven't released information about how the teenager was killed, but her family believes the suspect was driven by hate for Nikki's identity.
I believe he killed her because she was a transgender. I believe that with all my heart.
Bogdanov has not admitted to the crime, but detectives say he did admit he was out with Nikki the night she went missing and said he was disturbed when he found out she was biologically male. Tonight, advocates took to the microphone and spoke about the reality that even in 2019, the work to eliminate violence and discrimination against the LGBTQ community is still urgent.
We all deserve a world free of violence, no matter our differences, to not be killed for the person we want to be.
That was the voice of the president of the National Women's Coalition Against Violence and Exploitation. She said that they will make 2020 about Nikki. They will push for stronger hate crime laws.
But the prosecution wasn't finished. Based on the evidence that Bogdanov had strangled Nikki after learning she was transgender, they added a charge of malicious harassment, Washington State's version of a hate crime. They were arguing that Nikki's identity was the motive for her murder. Initially, a judge set Bogdanov's bail at $750,000, a decision that was met with outrage from Nikki's mother and LGBTQ+ advocates, who argued it was far too low for a man who had already fled the country once.
Walked away.
Nikki's mom spoke to the judge, hoping Bogdanov would stay in jail without bail. The whole time, her daughter's face going through her mind what the man beside her had allegedly done.
It will never be the same again because he chose to murder my baby girl, Nikki.
The state wanted bail denied, but his attorney argued previous similar cases had bail set and that he had no criminal history since her alleged murder.
There's also a lot of hurt in the community.
Moments later, the judge agreed with the defense.
The court's going to set bail at $750,000.
The group was shocked. Supporters could be seen visibly upset as they left the courtroom. Some in tears that the man who's accused of murdering Nikki could post bail and be free.
That's $750,000 for a teenager's life, where he went online to find somebody. He could have walked away.
Outside, in the rain and fighting through tears, Nikki's mom was angry.
I feel like the judicial system just failed my baby one more time. It's like her being murdered all over again. Jobs at the justice system. My baby's gone, you know, she's not coming back.
The case will move forward, with the trial starting in June, leaving community organizers thinking of ways to keep the case in the public's attention.
It is to build a coalition of activists and people from this community to come together, continue paying attention to this case, continue to make sure that media stays aware of what's going on, so that when we go into trial, we have the outcome that Nikki deserves.
In Vancouver, Devin Haskins, KGW News.
In response to the public outcry and the new evidence of his international flight, prosecutors successfully argued for a higher bail. And in March 2020, it was increased to a much more substantial $2 million. The net was tightening. The trial of David Bogdanov commenced in August of 2021, and it brought national attention to the deadly intersection of violence and transphobia. The central question for the jury was one of motive. What happened in that van? The prosecution's argument was clear and forceful. They contended that the sexual encounter occurred, that Bogdanov then discovered Nikki was transgender, and that he became enraged. This rage, fueled by hatred and prejudice, led him to strangle her with a phone charger cord. His shock, discomfort, and feeling really, really disturbed. His own admissions were not an excuse, but the very motive for the killing. This was a hate-fueled murder. Bogdanov's defense, however, was a story that evolved over time. He abandoned his original tale of simply letting her out of the car. Now he took the stand with a new story, one of self-defense. He testified that the encounter turned aggressive, that Nikki lunged for a loaded gun he had in his truck, and that he used a phone charging cord to restrain her in self-defense. He claimed he accidentally tightened it around her neck until she stopped moving. It was a dramatic claim, but it directly contradicted his initial statements to police, where he never mentioned a struggle or a gun. The prosecution pounced on this, arguing that this new story was a desperate fabrication, a last-ditch effort to conceal a brutal, hate-motivated killing. They pointed to his lies, his flight to Ukraine, and the callous dumping of her body as the actions of a guilty man, not someone who had acted in panicked self-defense. And there was another deeply troubling layer to the defense strategy. Advocates and observers noted that the defense appeared to be attempting to use what is known as a panic defense, specifically a trans-panic defense. This controversial legal tactic argues that a defendant's mental state was so disturbed by the victim's gender identity or sexual orientation that they lost control, potentially reducing their culpability from murder to manslaughter. It's a strategy that, in effect, blames the victim for the violence committed against them. But in a landmark twist, this particular defense tactic was blocked. The high-profile nature of Nikki's murder had already catalyzed a legislative change in Washington state. A new law, championed by Nikki's mother and activists, had been passed. It was called the Nikki Kuhnhausen Act, and it specifically prohibited the use of a panic defense based on a victim's gender identity or sexual orientation. The very defense Bogdanov's team might have relied on had been outlawed in Nikki's name. The law had come just in time. After just 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. On August 27, 2021, David Bogdanov was found guilty on both counts: second-degree murder and malicious harassment as a hate crime. It was a decisive victory for the prosecution and a moment of profound relief and validation for Nikki's family and the LGBTQ+ community. At his sentencing on September 9, 2021, the judge explicitly cited the hate-motivated nature of the crime. He handed down the maximum possible sentence for the murder conviction, 19.5 years in prison.
Now at 10, justice for a Vancouver teen murdered after a man found out she was transgender. He'll now face the maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. It's 10 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jeff Gianola.
And I'm Elizabeth Din. David Bogdanov was convicted of murdering Nikki Kuhnhausen after learning she was a transgender woman in 2019.
Our Jennifer Dowling was at a vigil tonight for Nikki. Jennifer joins us live tonight. I know you talked with her family and friends. How are they feeling following that sentencing, Jennifer?
Good evening, Jeff. Much relief. And I'm standing at Esther Short Park where that vigil just wrapped up tonight. And there were around 100 people here who came out to remember Nikki. So a big showing. And they say that now that she's finally received justice, it's been a long time in coming. The park filled with song, prayer, and the love of family, friends, and advocates who came out to remember 17-year-old Nikki Kuhnhausen.
I am really blessed, and I am super grateful to the community and all the support from everyone.
Nikki's mom, Lisa Woods, reflected on the joy Nikki brought into her life as a child.
She just loved to dress up and wear high heel shoes and makeup, and she just loved being a little girl.
My daughter's transgender, and when I was looking for support, I came across her picture.
Lisa held tight to a picture of Nikki as she left the courtroom following the sentence of David Bogdanov, the man convicted of strangling her with a cell phone cord.
The most awful feeling in the world is losing your baby, but especially to such violence and no remorse.
He was sentenced to more than 20 years for the murder.
I couldn't ask for a better judge. He was amazing. He really gave life to my daughter.
He was drinking water and tearing up quite a bit. It got very, very emotional.
The judge was very clear that he was giving him the max on both counts.
Some in attendance were part of the Justice for Nikki task force, which advocated for the Nikki Kuhnhausen Act, passed in 2020. Lyndon Wall says it banned the use of trans or gay panic defense in a murder or assault.
I think it put the case into regional and national news and attention, and I think what that did for the trans community was bring attention to some of the things that the trans community is burdened with.
As people scrawled messages in chalk on the sidewalk for Nikki, advocates reflected that justice for the teen means that things are actually changing.
Nikki's story has allowed us to take a giant leap forward in the last few weeks in Clark County.
The hate crime sentence was ordered to be served concurrently. In a final, poignant moment in the courtroom, Nikki's mother, Lisa Woods, held a photo of her daughter as a child and a stuffed animal, advocating for the maximum sentence and stating that Bogdanov deserved nothing less. The defense attorney noted that an appeal had already been filed, ensuring the legal battle was not entirely over. The legacy of Nikki Kuhnhausen, however, extends far beyond the courtroom. Her tragic death sparked a massive community response. Vigils were held, with hundreds gathering to mourn and show solidarity. A formal advocacy group, the Justice for Nikki Task Force, was formed, co-founded by her mother and local activists, to push for justice and legislative change. And that change was real and lasting. Nikki's Law, formerly the Nikki Kuhnhausen Act, was signed into law by Governor Jay Inslee on March 5, 2020. It made Washington one of only 16 states in the US to ban the panic defense, ensuring that no other family would have to watch a killer use their loved one's identity as an excuse for murder. Her name is now permanently etched into the law of the land, a powerful memorial born from unimaginable loss. Nikki's story is a stark reminder of a grim reality. Her murder was not an isolated incident. It fits a disturbing pattern of violence disproportionately targeting transgender people, particularly transgender women of colour. In 2019, the year she was killed, it was one of the deadliest years on record for the transgender community in the United States. This is an epidemic of violence, compounded by underreporting and systemic failures. The case of Nikki Kuhnhausen is a story of a life full of potential, brutally taken. It's a story of a predator who thought he could lie, flee, and evade justice. It's a story of a mother's love transforming grief into a powerful force for change. And it's a sobering lesson that in the face of hatred, a community can rally, fight back, and ensure that a name is remembered not just for a death, but for the justice and change it inspired. Life is full of chapters. For Nikki Kuhnhausen, her final chapter was one of tragedy, but thanks to the relentless pursuit of justice by her family, advocates, and the legal system, it also became a chapter of accountability, reform, and a legacy that will undoubtedly save lives. And with that, that's the chapter. Thank you for watching. Stay safe out there.